Hello and welcome to this grant writing workshop. My name is Kaylee Linz. I'm the Executive Director of the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council and the Columbia Kootenay Cultural Alliance. I am joined today by Lily Anderson, CKCA's Grants Officer. Hi, Lily.
Hello.
Before we go any further today, I'd like to acknowledge that the work of the CKCA and the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council spans the traditional territory of the Sinixt Confederacy, the Ktunaxa, the Secwepemc, the Syilx, and Lheidli T'enneh Nations. In our work to support community cultural development, we acknowledge that we have a role to play in ensuring that all artistic disciplines and cultural practices can thrive, not just those of settler communities. This session today is hosted by the Columbia Kootenay Cultural Alliance. A little more about who we are. Oh, there we go. The CKCA is a project of the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council. So the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council is the charity behind the CKCA and behind the granting programs that we'll be discussing today. The CKCA and its funding programs is entirely funded by the Columbia Basin Trust to carry out arts and culture funding programs within the Columbia Basin region. If you have questions about whether or not you are located within the Columbia Basin region, we'll direct you to our website where we have a map of that geographic area and you can situate yourself within that. What we're going to be talking about today, we'll be giving you a full overview of CKCA granting programs. There's 6 programs that we currently offer. Basic eligibility for each program, some notes about accessibility within the application process, deadlines for submitting applications, an overview of the application process, some tips around budgets, things that are eligible, things that are ineligible, and what to watch out for when you're working on that part of the application. As well, just a few notes about our grant management system and some details about the application assessment. So when it comes to eligibility for CKCA grants, first and foremost, CKCA funding focuses on arts and culture projects. So arts and culture must be the primary focus of the project you're proposing. And applicants must reside in the Columbia Basin region. What this means is that the basin has been your primary residence for the past 12 months or immediately prior to the application deadline. Again, just refer to that map on the website if you have questions about whether you're within the Columbia Basin. All CKCA grants are non-disciplinary, so you're welcome to apply for arts and culture projects based in any artistic discipline or tradition, including interdisciplinary arts. And if you've received a grant from us in the past, take a look before you apply to ensure that you're up to date with any requirements, contracts, or reporting that you have outstanding, as that may impact your eligibility for future grants. And if you're considering a heritage project, let us know. We're happy to direct you to some other funding agencies who focus more on heritage projects, but currently heritage-specific projects are ineligible for funding through the CKCA.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in and start talking about the different programs. So the first one we'll be talking about today is arts funding to communities. And this program is targeted towards individual artists in all disciplines or arts and culture groups or organizations. These applications are assessed by a local adjudicating committee in the community you're applying to. And there's more about that later in the workshop, but I'll just keep moving through all the different categories here. So the types of projects that you can do in this category are any local artistic or cultural projects benefiting basin artists or communities. The maximum request for this program is $2,500. And just to note, this is our smallest grant, but also it's our most flexible. So if you're an individual artist and a first-time applicant, we recommend that you start with this particular grant. So the second one we'll be talking about is minor capital arts. The eligibility for this program is for registered nonprofit arts and culture organizations and venues only. So this supports the capital needs, development, preservation of arts and culture venues and organizations. And examples of capital projects may include purchasing equipment, computers, software, instruments, theater risers, presentation cabinets or fixtures. And these grants can also support the renovation or building of facilities, as well as lighting or acoustical upgrades to your facility. The maximum request for this program for minor capital arts is $10,000. Moving on to the next one, which is touring. And the eligibility for this program is for individual artists in all disciplines or arts and culture groups and organizations who are registered or non-registered. And the types of projects would be for tours of arts and culture performances, exhibitions, and workshops. And the maximum request for this one is $5,000. And the goals of this grant are to help individuals or groups tour productions, exhibitions, or workshops in the basin and to increase public awareness of basin arts and culture productions. If to be eligible, you must include a minimum of 3 locations inside the Columbia Basin. So the next program we'll be talking about is mentoring and masterclasses. The eligibility for this program is for arts and culture groups or organizations or community groups and organizations. They can be non-registered groups. The types of projects, these are open to groups looking to support the artistic development of artists in the region. These grants are specifically geared toward providing learning opportunities for groups with an intermediate or advanced level of practice. Also, the masterclasses must be provided by instructors or mentors who are recognized professionals in their fields. The maximum request for this program is $5,000. The next one we'll be looking at is Major Project Arts and Culture. Eligibility for this program is for individual artists in all disciplines or arts and culture groups and organizations who are registered or non-registered. Types of projects would include large-scale arts and culture projects. These may include the creation of artistic works, bodies of work, arts and culture performances, events, or other initiatives on a major scale. And the maximum request, or the full request, the only request, is $10,000 for this program. And to ensure that your project meets the criteria for major project, we do recommend that you call the office, get in touch with myself or Kaylee, and ask pertinent questions from your, about your project, just to make sure that you're fitting into the criteria for this program. You'll be required to show other sources of revenue for your project. So we want to ensure that you're prepared for these requirements in this program. If you are an individual artist, you'll be required to provide a portfolio of your work for this one. And last but not least is Arts Evolution. So Arts Evolution eligibility includes registered nonprofit arts and culture organizations only. So this program facilitates multi-component arts and culture projects that support audience development, arts community development, or increased capacity within the presenting organization. Projects may include the creation of new works, curatorial projects, or collaborative arts and culture projects. Projects to present the work of a basin artist or artist to the community. And it supports the coordination, programming, and promotion of juried or curated exhibitions or performances. Projects may include a touring component also, and workshops and artist talks. Organizational development projects and workshops that will improve arts and culture organizations, structure, evolution, and capacity to serve their communities. And the maximum request for this program is $15,000. And back over to you, Kaylee.
And when it comes time to formulate your application, start by visiting our website at wkartscouncil.com/CKCA-funding. If you're watching this on the CKCA website right now, you'll find all of the information on this page below this video. And start by familiarizing yourself with the eligibility requirements contained in the primary funding policy document. You'll see that listed as number 2 on the page, as well as the guidelines for specific programs you're applying to. Be sure to thoroughly read the project guidelines and the application form as well before you begin. All applications are now submitted online via our grant management system. When you're ready to begin a new application, you're going to click the Begin New Application button within the specific program page for the program that you're applying to. Once you have an ongoing application, that item number 4, CKCA online portal, that's where you can go to access existing or already funded projects within the portal. And if you have accessibility issues of any kind, we're happy to provide hard copy applications. Please just reach out to us at least 10 business days in advance of the deadline so we can ensure that those materials will reach you in time. And we're here to support you in any other way to ensure that you can get your application submitted to us. Just to note as well that if you're applying on behalf of an organization, we recommend that you use a general organization email address, something like info@wkartscouncil.com, and not your personal email. This will ensure that other individuals within the organization can access your applicant history, and it will also ensure that the email address can continue to be used to access current applications beyond the scope of this application phase. If you're applying on behalf of a group that is non-registered, such as a group that is ad hoc or any other entity that's not a nonprofit or charity, keep in mind as well that you'll need to apply with an individual applicant's name and contact information. That's important for us to issue a contract to you. And a few notes on the budget as you're working through your application. First off, make sure you use the CKCA budget form provided. There's special formulas in there to help you balance your budget. And on that note, make sure that your revenues and expenses do balance, meaning the amount you receive from all sources is the same as what you're planning to spend on the project. Be sure to only include revenues and expenses related to the project activities described in your application. So if your project is part of a larger initiative or series for which you're not seeking support, be sure you do not include other activities in your application and budget. This is particularly important because all funded activities must take place within the Columbia Basin. So if you're, for instance, applying to the touring program with a tour within the Columbia Basin, but you're tacking that on to some other dates that you have throughout the summer, you're welcome to mention that and let us know that you are continuing your activities for the summer outside of the basin, but be very clear that none of those activities or expenses are included in your project proposal to CKCA. As well, be careful not to include ineligible expenses, as the inclusion of ineligible activities anywhere in your application could make the entire application ineligible. As well, include the amount you are requesting from the CKCA as revenue in the line provided. There should be a very clear line where you're asked to state the requested amount, and that should match what you've put in your application form as well. You're welcome to include in-kind donations in your budget. Just make sure that you also reflect the in-kind contribution in both revenue and expense categories. And if your project involves the sale of original artistic or cultural work, please include projected proceeds of sales in your budget as a source of revenue as well. Some examples of eligible expenses that you may have: venue rentals, paint and other creative materials, anything that's consumed or used up within the course of creating the project. Artist fees, production or project coordination fees. This includes subsistence costs, the payment of artists for the creation, performance, or exhibition of their work. And marketing and promotional expenses. These are eligible provided they are part of the arts and culture project itself. CKCA cannot fund standalone marketing initiatives, but if you have marketing costs related to the project that's being funded, those are A-OK to include. And on the flip side, some things that are ineligible within CKCA applications. These include operating costs. Please note that all of our grants are project grants. CKCA does not provide operating funding, nor can CKCA funding be used to reduce deficits. Also ineligible is retroactive funding. So keep in mind that the CKCA funding year begins June 1st. That's the date that funded projects can begin. There are some exceptions that you'll see in our guidelines related to preliminary research or planning, but any expenses incurred as a result of a CKCA funded project must begin June 1st or later. And again, keep in mind when that eligible timeline is and when your project needs to be completed based on the project you're applying to. CKCA can also not fund any project for which the primary activity is not artistic or cultural work. Give us a call and talk through your project with us if you have any questions about that. CKC can also not fund school-based activities. It's okay if your project utilizes a school as a venue, but it cannot be a curriculum-related activity or part of regular school activities. And lastly, capital expenditures are ineligible unless outlined within the program guidelines. There are specific caps around capital expenditures, so anything that will outlast the duration of your project, think about things like software or furniture, for instance. Keep in mind that programs have different criteria around allowed capital expenditures. And before I hand it back to Lily, just a few notes on general grant writing best practices. Think about telling the story of your grant. Of course, our steering committee members receive plenty of applications. So it's really important that you tell your story compellingly, simply, and clearly. So keep in mind the 5 whys, the who, what, where, when, and why of your project. Also be sure to clearly explain the how. And I like to make sure that there's an I in grant applications that I write as well. And the I refers to impact. Tell us how the project will impact your own creative development and how it will contribute to the artistic and cultural experiences of residents in the basin. It's always a good practice to ask yourself, how will you measure the success of this project? You'll often see that exact question within the applications. And secondly, is this project realistic and achievable? That's one of those things that the steering committee will look for in its selection of recommended projects. And it's always a good idea to share your writing with a friend or collaborator to make sure it's easy to understand. Remember that most of our granting programs are competitive, so you can have a great project, do everything correctly within the application, and still not receive funding. So you want to spend time with your application and review it multiple times. Just ensure that it's as strong as can be. Again, always great to pass it by a friend or a colleague to see that you're putting your best foot forward in your application.
So we anticipate launching the new CKCA funding programs on January 17th, 2024. In the meantime, we encourage you to go to our website to learn more about each funding program. Lots of information there you can find. You'll be able to begin your application following the launch date, and we will announce it with flying colors when that happens. So I'm going to just talk to you guys a little bit about how the decisions are made for funding these programs or funding each project. For arts funding to communities, the first one I talked about, these applications are assessed by a local adjudicating committee assembled by your local arts council before moving on to the CKCA steering committee for a second pass and final approval. And when you apply, you'll need to tell us which arts council your local council is based on your location or the primary location of the project. So for instance, if you're applying in a different jurisdiction, you'll need to apply directly to that arts council or select that arts council on your application. Funding recommendations for all these programs are made by the CKCA steering committee. This is a group of volunteers who have diverse range of experience in the arts, nonprofits, and community initiatives. Each member is elected for a 2-year term on the steering committee, and while nominated by their local arts council, they act in the best interests of the residents across the entire Columbia Basin. And lastly, the Columbia Basin Trust reviews and approves all recommendations before we issue acceptance packages and funding contracts for approved projects. So then application results will be released sometime in July. While your project is eligible to begin in June, just be aware that you're assuming the risk of working on a project that may not be funded. And back to Kaylee. Oh, you're muted, babe.
And we're back.
We're back.
Okay, Well, just as we wrap up here, I want to remind you that the website for all of this funding information is wkartscouncil.com/CKCA-funding. You'll probably find that hyperlink wherever you're listening to this recorded webinar. And I'd also like to give a sincere thanks to the Columbia Basin Trust for their support of these workshops. Oops. For their support of these workshops and the granting programs themselves. West Kootenay Regional Arts Council is a fund delivery partner of the Columbia Basin Trust, and these programs are just one way that the Trust supports community-driven initiatives throughout the basin. Lastly, if you have any questions about anything you've heard today, the work of the CKCA or the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Lily's website is there at min@wkartscouncil.com. I'm director at wkartscouncil.com, and you can give us a phone call at any time. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing your application.